everyone. Hi, so I'm going to talk about the 7 steps to becoming fearlessly authentic. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Wonderful. Okay. I can make mental health disorders disappear. To be more specific, I help people break free of anxiety, depression, PTSD, dissociative disorders, and suicidal tendencies. Not only do I help people break free of mental health conditions, I also help them to reclaim their power and their joy on a journey to becoming fearlessly authentic. Now you're all wondering how I do this, because what I'm talking about is a really quite an extraordinary claim to make. The general consensus within our medical profession is that mental health conditions cannot be eradicated. Yes, they can be better managed and better controlled, but they cannot be eradicated. Now, yes, it seems then that this is an extraordinary claim, but it happens with 90 to 95% of the clients that I work with. And I'm certainly not a magician. So what is it that I am doing differently that allows people to heal? To understand what I'm doing differently, you must understand the intersection between psychology and spirituality. Or rather, I should say, the intersection between psychotherapy and subtle energy work. You see, there is a sacred space in this intersection. I call it a sacred space because this is where mind, emotions, and soul all reside. They not only reside here, but they interface with one another. And that's the key to healing. Let's go a little bit deeper. Let's talk about modern medicine and the limitations of modern medicine. We know that our modern medicine has limitations, even though the last 300 years of medicine has produced the most amazing discoveries. Nonetheless, there are limitations. You see, our modern medicine is based on what we call the reductionist approach. That means that everything is defined into 3-dimensional space. Now, what does that mean when we are human? According to our modern medicine, when everything is defined as 3-dimensional space, to be human, it means that we begin and end with our skin. That is it. So within our modern medicine, human beings are seen as nothing more than highly intelligent robots. Yet we know, and there's so much research now to show, there's research from studies in consciousness, there's research from studies in quantum physics to show that human beings continue to exist at subtler and subtler levels beyond our physical bodies. And so what our modern medicine is doing when it doesn't acknowledge this, it takes spirit out of the equation. But we are mind, body, and spirit, right? So when we put spirit back into the equation, everything changes. And that's the secret of making what seems like miracles actually happen. Let's talk a little bit more about how modern medicine views mental health disorders. Within the context, if everything is defined into 3-dimensional space, then when we are suffering from anxiety or depression, it must be because of neurochemical imbalances, or that the limbic system is acting out, or overactive. With all the research on studies in consciousness and studies in quantum physics, we need to start to learn to change our perspective. When we change our perspective and we put the idea of spirit back into the equation, everything changes. It changes because now human beings are no longer just physical beings. We're not just physical objects. We also have a mental body, an emotional body, and a spirit body. Think of Einstein's famous formula, E equals mc squared. Interpreted, it means that energy and matter are dual expressions of the same substance. It's just like what leading physicists, quantum physicist Amit Goswami would say, that consciousness is the ground of all being, that actually it's consciousness that's the driver. So what happens when we put spirit back into the equation? When we say that consciousness is the driving force for everything that exists, whether it shows up as mental health conditions or it shows up as abundance, whether it shows up as physical disease or it shows up as something else. You see, consciousness does not have any hindrances. So this perspective provides us with an alternative view to mental health conditions, and not just mental health conditions, but any struggle that we have. Instead of thinking about conditions like anxiety and depression as if they are a part of us, we can now think of them as symptoms to a wider problem. A problem of the soul, the spirit, a problem of consciousness. And it's really about not being aligned with our soul, with our deepest truth that leads to these problems. And there's symptoms that show up to show us that something is wrong, something is not aligned. This soul consciousness, in its purest form, is described as the true self. Isn't that the highest level of authenticity that we can get to? By the way, there are a number of different definitions out there when it comes to authenticity. There are lay definitions and there are some expert definitions. And as I've looked through those definitions, I realized that they really fell into two different camps or two different schools of thought. And those two schools of thought are one that's the psychological approach, where really we want to go from our brokenness to our wholeness. That's the ultimate goal of psychotherapy, is to help people go from a broken ego, an unhealthy ego, to a healthy ego, where we are actualized. And so a lot of people will give out definitions that's based on that notion. But then there is the spiritual definition of authenticity, where it's a lot more than fixing our brokenness, where it's about becoming realigned to our truth, our highest truth, almost to the point of enlightenment. So looking at these two definitions, what I did was I wanted to come up with a definition that could embrace both of these camps, because our journey doesn't stop with becoming a healthy ego. Our journey must continue towards enlightenment. And so some years ago, I coined a phrase. I call it the benevolent warrior. And so to me, authenticity is to accomplish this goal of standing as a benevolent warrior. Now, what does the benevolent warrior mean? It means someone who is able to stand true in their power, which means not submitting power in any way, yet they will never misuse power. It's a really fine boundary, because given half an opportunity, most people will misuse power. I say to my students sometimes, let's make you president for a week. Zero accountability. What will you do? You see, with great power comes great responsibility, and there are very few individuals that have come to that place where they truly understand what it means to be a benevolent warrior. Yes, people like Jesus and Mahavira and Buddha, they were that. They had attained that place. And in modern day, we can say Thich Nhat Hanh, we can say Mahatma Gandhi, we can say Mother Teresa. These were all individuals, or they are individuals, that are able to stand true in their power, yet never misuse power. Because they understand that every thought, every decision, every act creates ripples throughout the universe. And I want to tell you that it is possible for every single one of us to get to that place, to find that place within ourselves where we can be those benevolent warriors, where we can be fearlessly authentic. I want to make a really important point here, because I come across a lot of spiritual people who are on the spiritual path, and yet we've talked about how in many ways our struggles are illusions. And because of that, I come across a lot of people on the spiritual path, yet they are practicing spirituality in a way, well, if I don't believe it's really there, perhaps it will disappear. This is what we call a spiritual bypass, because the truth is, it doesn't disappear. The truth is that what we experience in any given moment in time is what we are experiencing in any given moment in time. What we feel is what we feel, and we must be willing to acknowledge it. The ultimate goal in the hero's journey is to be able to integrate the spirit with the physical reality. And when you can integrate the two and bring them into balance, that's when you are authentic. That is when you are connected. That is when miracles and synchronicities begin to happen. When we ignore what is really there because we hope that it will disappear, we simply end up being even more ungrounded and disconnected from ourselves. So we come back to that sacred space, the intersection between psychotherapy and spirituality or subtle energy work. What we must understand and master in this sacred space is very important. This knowledge can help us to effectively treat not just mental health conditions, but all sorts of struggles. They can help us to heal human suffering, whether it's anxiety or depression, or trust issues, or relationship struggles, or fear, or anger, or shame, or guilt. These are all human suffering. It's not enough for us to understand that we are mind, body, and spirit. We must go a little bit further. And this is the knowledge that nobody shares with you. Yes, we are mind, body, and spirit, but just like the physical body has an anatomy and a physiology and a set of pathologies, because it can be diseased when it's not taken care of properly, so does the emotional body. So does the mental body, and so does the spirit body. Each of these bodies has an anatomy and a physiology, and a set of pathologies that comes with it. And how mind, body, and spirit interact and interface with one another, imagine a set of Russian dolls. But these Russian dolls are not separate. They're all interconnected. Just like the neurons in your brain They're so tiny, but they're finely interconnected. So imagine all of this space that's around you, 6 to 9 feet wide, interconnected with these tiny cells that interconnect and keep it together, your mind, body, and spirit. So when we say that we're just a physical body and we're just going to treat what's inside this physical body, we're missing the point. We have to go deeper than that. My journey began about 20 years ago. I was working as an assistant psychologist in Oxford. And I was fortunate that I got to work with some of the best psychologists in the areas of mental health and learning disabilities. And having worked in several mental health hospitals, I got to see every type of mental health disorder. And I got to see every type of suffering. There were people there who were in deep suffering because they had been victimized. They had been abused. And there were people there who had been the abusers, and now they were suffering from shame and guilt. And modern medicine's answer is sedate them, give them some pills. And I knew then that there was something wrong, because that cannot be the answer. Yes, it puts a lid on the problem. It manages the symptoms, but it does not create healing. It does not get to the root cause. One of the reasons why I was looking for answers was because I was in deep suffering myself, and I wanted to be hopeful that I could find answers to heal my own suffering. And so as time went on, I turned to spirituality for answers. And I spent several years training extensively in many different forms of meditation, traditional meditation, and many different forms of subtle energy healing work. And what I found is, after all these years of attending seminars and reading books and workshops, I had just scratched the surface of my own suffering. And as I looked around me, there were a lot of people that went from workshop to workshop, retreat to retreat, and seminar to seminar. And they talked about healing, but there was really little transformative change that I could see in them. Their suffering had not shifted. And it disheartened me, because it felt like this is going to be an endless journey to nowhere. And I think at that point I stopped attending anything myself, and I went inward. And it's really when you're at your lowest that you enter a state of complete surrender, and you open yourself up to be guided by God, universe, whatever you want to call it. And that's when something began to shift inside of me. There was guidance that started coming through that I had not expected. And one day I had a really profound experience, which I want to say was the beginning of what I call energy-based psychotherapy. So I was sitting in meditation, and as I sat in meditation, an image began to appear to me. And so the image was of a younger me, and tears were rolling down her cheeks, just endless tears. She was in suffering. So as I connected with her, I knew she was me. And I stayed with her because there's an urge that comes up inside of us that says, I don't want to know, this is painful. There's an urge that comes up inside of us that says, this isn't real. I'm imagining this. And those are the urges you have to overcome, because there's fear there. As I stayed with her and I connected deeper with her, I realized she was that part of me that felt she did not have a voice and no one heard her. And I had gone my whole life, up into my 30s, my whole life, feeling this way. And when you carry those patterns it creates so much suffering inside of you. As I stayed with this image and I could feel all her pain, and now I could feel this pain inside my body. There were parts of my body that felt heavy and parts of my body that felt the pain, because that's where the energies were stuck. Because I was also trained in subtle energy work, I began to see the energy. And with the energy work that I did, I could start to pull the energy out of my subtle body. Something shifted right in that moment. She stopped crying and she started smiling. And as time went on, I realized I had healed a part of myself. I say that was the beginning of energy-based psychotherapy, because what I had done was I had integrated psychotherapy with energy work, advanced subtle energy work. So this process became very addictive for me, and I would try to create the space every day to go back inside and do more and more work. And I began to heal issues, big issues, and each layer that I peeled away inside of me brought in more peace, a little more joy, a little more groundedness. And then I began to work with other people, use the same process to treat other people. And as I did that, what I found was that when I got great results, but if someone came in with a lot of resistance, I couldn't help them. And that really frustrated me. Until one day I was facilitating a workshop, and one of the participants in this workshop was a woman that I had become friends with. And so I had gotten to know her and her struggles pretty well. I also knew she had a lot of resistance. And as I took the whole group through a guided process, and she described the images that she had seen, I realized something. In that moment, I had an epiphany. I realized that all the images that she had seen were metaphors for what was going on inside of her, for where the blocks were, and what I needed to do to help her move through into healing. The epiphany was so great, but it makes so much sense, because think of how the soul communicates with us. Our soul, our consciousness, our psyche communicates with us through signs and symbols. Just like in the dream state, just like in the meditation state. That is also the language of the subconscious mind, because the subconscious mind is the storehouse of not just all our memories, but so much more of where the blocks are and how we feel about ourselves, and so much more. As I began to work with the language of the subconscious mind, and I began to treat people using metaphors and paradoxes rather than memories or anything else, my work took on a new level. And I found that I could help people move through their struggles very, very quickly. With energy-based psychotherapy, we can eradicate mental health disorders. We can eradicate almost any struggle, and it doesn't have to take dozens of sessions. I have helped people who've come in with suicidal tendencies and shifted that completely in a single session. Yes, sometimes when the issue is really deep, it may take a few sessions to get through, but a single session is sometimes enough to clean something up. As time went on, what happened was I had a group of regular students. And this group of people would follow me. They really believed in the work. And I guess they were after enlightenment, not even authenticity. Each time we did a workshop, each time they came to see me, I would ask the question, what shifted? What is still there? And this allowed me to see that there was a journey that every single person went through to reach authenticity. It does not matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your individual biography is. It doesn't matter what you have been through in life. It's the same journey that we all take to becoming fearlessly authentic. And those are the 7 steps I'm going to talk about. So the first step to becoming fearlessly authentic is to heal disconnects. Let me talk a little bit more about healing disconnects. I think there are small disconnects and there are big disconnects. And in many ways, we are disconnecting from ourselves all the time. When we get into a good book, when we get into a good television show, in that moment, we've disconnected from ourselves. But there is a deeper level of disconnect that we go into. When we binge eat or we watch hours and hours of television, we are disconnecting from ourselves to avoid something. But there are even bigger disconnects. And within the psychological realm, they might be called emotional disconnect, or they might be called out-of-body experiences. In both of those are 2 big disconnects we must heal for any other spiritual work to stick. Why? Because energetically, this is what it looks like. If you are not in your body, and we see this with trauma patients all the time. Sometimes when we have experienced something traumatic or something drastically negative, it's no longer safe to be in our body. It's no longer safe to be with ourselves. It's no longer safe to be in our relationships or to be in life. And so when it's not safe, that's the underlying theme. When it's not safe, we check out. And energetically, it's as if the spirit literally has left the body and is hanging out here with a cord that's attached to the body. And this affects the root chakra, the lowest chakra. Emotional disconnect will literally energetically show up as if you are here, but your emotional body sits there. Why? Because it's too painful to be with your emotions. If I really allow myself to feel the way I do, I'm not going to be able to cope. I'm not going to be able to process through. It's too overwhelming. All my emotions are just too painful. I don't want to know. And so we literally push our emotional bodies away. And this shows up in the sacral chakra, the 2nd chakra. And they sit like big blocks, big energetic blocks in the lower 2 chakras, these disconnects. What it means is that we are not grounded. There is no energy, light, and information that can come into our energy system from the earth. You see, as we are energy systems, right? And these energy systems need to allow a connection with the heavens and allow a connection with the earth, because we're also in a physical body. And through this connection, we receive energy, light, and information all of the time. This is what keeps us alive. This is the chi or the ki or the prana that many civilizations talk about. This energy needs to be moving freely in and out of our system. It's what gives us life. But when we are disconnected, there is no energy, light, and information that can possibly move in via the earth into the lower 2 chakras. and instead there are just those blocks that sit there. You can do all of the grounding exercises in the world. It's not going to make a difference. The key here is to help a person move through those feelings of not being safe, to deal with the traumas that are there, and change those programs to feeling safe. And of course, we do that with energy-based psychotherapy by helping to guide them into the fear, into those feelings of not being safe, and then to energetically pull them out so they are no longer part of the person's framework. And as we do that, then the person's ready to either come back into their body or they're ready to reconnect with their emotional body. And when we do that, the amount of energy that will start to move through the person is phenomenal. One of the things I found is when people are not physically grounded in their bodies, they usually have very cold feet. And when you reconnect them, the energy begins to flow, and all of a sudden they warm up and they lose that feeling cold in the feet. Once we've healed the disconnects, we move on to the next level. And at the next level, we need to start opening up the heart center. If you are familiar at all with the research that's going on at the Heart Math Institute, then you know that the heart is now being called the heart brain. Why? Because it sends out an electromagnetic field that is 60 times greater in amplitude than the physical brain. The heart center is also the center of trust, faith, and love, unconditional love. But the society that we're living in today, many people have heart centers that are shut down. We've built so many walls around ourselves because we don't want to trust. Why? We're scared that we're going to get hurt. If I trust, if I allow myself to be vulnerable, I'm going to get hurt. And I don't want to get hurt, so let me build up walls around myself. When we build walls around ourselves, we're not able to connect deeply with anyone or anything, even ourselves. And so at this stage of the journey, the only important thing that we have to do, because there's many levels and layers to the heart walls. There are many levels and layers to opening up the heart center to unconditional love and surrender and trust. But at this stage of the journey, the only thing we need to do is to help a person open up their heart to themselves. This is really important. I recently had a client, and she's a young teenage girl. Her mother brought her in because she'd heard from someone that I get really good results with depression and suicide. And that's exactly what she was struggling with, was she had depressive symptoms and she had thought about suicide. As I worked on her, she put up resistance, and there was very definitely an emotional disconnect because she refused to connect with her emotional body. And so I knew that I needed to use some backdoor tricks. As we worked together, the piece that really helped was how she had so many trust issues. Her parents had gone through a divorce, and she had experienced some betrayal from some friends, and that was why her heart had shut down, and she had built walls around herself to the point where she didn't want to go out. She didn't want to interact with anyone. So helping her to move through that feeling of unsafe back into safe allowed the heart wall to come down and for her to be okay with her emotions again. That's a big deal. The mom noticed an instant shift the minute she walked out of my room. Anyway, let's move on. The third step on this journey is inner child healing. We have to be reconnected with ourselves, and we have to be open to ourselves in order to do inner child work. I hear people all the time who've done tons of inner child work and it doesn't stick. And when inner child comes up again, inner child wounds come up again, they're like, oh, here we go again. Well, not with this work. When we heal the inner child, it is healed. Everything sticks and nothing comes back. In inner child, we deal with all kinds of wounds that come from childhood experiences. But I'll share a story of some of the other stuff that can come up in inner child. A couple of years ago, I had a young woman who had been raped at the age of 12. And in her case, she had repressed the memory. She never shared it with anyone, that's what had happened to her. And she has simply repressed everything. And what she realized by revisiting that in inner child, not reliving it, but just revisiting it for healing, forgiveness, clearing, moving on, was that there had been a shadow that had followed her since then. It was like she was in a dark cloud. And that part of her showed up as a zombie, because that was how she felt and how she was living life. So healing that allowed her not to be just liberated, but to start living life again. After inner child, most people usually go for 3 to 4 months of integrating the work that we do at inner child. We do it in a weekend, we do it in an intensive. And it can take 3 to 4 months to integrate all of that work because it's deep. But what starts to come up then is fear, all kinds of fear. And we have so many fears. There are the ones that we're really aware of, and then there are fears that are really subtle. And so I have a special process to go in and pull fear out. Because again, if you can access the fear and then pull it out, it's not there anymore. And fear is again another thing that our society says, well, we can't heal fear. We can confront it and we can overcome it, but we cannot heal it. And again, I want to turn that over and say, no, we can. We can absolutely heal fear, so it's not there anymore. Years ago, I had a young man. He came to see me. He said, I love my girlfriend, and I don't want to lose her, but she's looking for commitment, and I can't bring myself to commit to her. So what can you do? So in our work together, initially we talked, and I realized that he had lost his father recently, and his father they had been like best friends. So as we worked together, the first thing that I did was I connected him in spirit with his father so that he could process through and release the grief that he was still carrying. After the moment was gone, he was unable to let his father go. He just wanted to stay there, holding his father in spirit. And the father in spirit was pulling away. So I knew that there was something abnormal right there. As I asked, I was told that it was fear of loss. And so as we dug deeper, he went into what you could call a past life or a metaphor, where he saw himself as a young boy on a beach and being attacked by a huge snake. Now, fortunately, he had a stick and was able to fend off the snake and hit it and then escape back to the village. But the moment had left him. In that moment where the snake had attacked, the fear that had arisen in him had stayed in him. And he saw himself growing old, but the stick remained in the corner of the room. And so there was a connection, the fear of death, fear of loss, and how it showed up was that if I love, I will lose someone to death. And that was why he was not making the commitment to his girlfriend. After that session, it took him a while to process through. And from what I know, they are both now happily married and they have kids. So that was all it took to clean that up. The fifth piece that comes up after fear is shame. We think of shame as something that is, well, we've done something wrong and therefore we carry shame from it. But that's not just the case. We have a huge amount of shame from our social self, what I call the social self. The social self is that part of us that starts from birth. And every identity that's either slapped on us, from name to religion to cultural group to social status, and every identity that we choose, like a profession, comes with a set of invisible rules. And we, in order to belong to that group, we take these rules on, whether they resonate with our deepest truth or not. And when we are not able to follow those rules, or when they don't resonate with us and we want to break away from them, we either shame ourselves or we get shamed. And we carry this shame inside of us until we can heal it. One of my clients some years ago, she came to see me because something didn't feel right in her life. And she was able to access a memory of sitting in an abortion clinic. And it wasn't an abortion that she wanted to go through, but she did it because she felt that was the only way to save her relationship with her husband, because that's what he wanted. And in that moment, because she knew it didn't resonate with her soul, what she took on was a lot of shame for doing that. Having cleared the shame, she also lost her addiction to cigarettes, because the cigarettes was a way to cover up the shame, to fill that void. So moving on to step 6, we deal with shadows. I call it shadows because it's anything that's not in conscious awareness. And literally what we deal with at this point is themes. Every single one of us has come in with some themes that we keep recreating over and over in our lives. And when we can get into these themes and clean them out, we are liberated. Every theme that you have, you are not just the victim, although you might be identified with the victim inside of you. You also have the opposite polarity, which is the abuser. Remember, to become a benevolent warrior, we must face the victim and the abuser inside of us. And so this is really important. And so once we clean out these themes that we've been running, it's like we get a blank slate. And the final piece is self-love, because when you have a blank slate, you get to write the rest of your life on that blank slate. And it's really about, what do you want to write? What do you want to fill that blank slate up with? And it's all types of self-love and self-compassion and self-acceptance that you can possibly get. And that's the final piece to becoming fearlessly authentic. If you guys are interested in my work, there's a number of ways you can connect with me. Come by my table. Make sure you fill out a form that allows you to get blogs and information about classes from me. You can also connect with me on my free online community. It's called the Fearlessly Authentic Fellowship Club. We're a cute little community. We're supportive of one another. We inspire one another, but we also meet in person once a month. It's every Friday, every third Friday of the month, and we meet at Lotus in Draper. You can also go to my website, instituteofconsciousliving.com, and subscribe to my ebook, where you'll get to hear much more about the 7 steps to becoming fearlessly authentic. I have a free ebook on there, so you can subscribe to that. And then if you have any questions at all, please come by my table. I'll be there this afternoon. Thank you.